You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. As always, so happy to be back. We got football soon. It's like here. Like here. Not just like me pretending that it's here. It's actually here. So we're going to get to that. So today we're going to do a little recruiting update and where Utah stands. Watch list season is upon us. A little tease at my AP Top 25 preseason ballot. Just a little one. And then we're going to hit the top storylines going into fall camp. So we'll get into that. But first, let me tell you about our partners, Canyon View Credit Union. Starting off strong. At Canyon View Credit Union, it's on the house. Close a mortgage and get a free appraisal up to $600. To learn more details or apply, visit canyonviewcu.com. You know, sometimes you just start these things and they just don't really work that well. I'm a little shaky. It's been 2 weeks since I've last podcast. Last week I was supposed to do an episode, but the week got a little crazy. I'm making my excuses right now. One, I was trying to hire some interns for the fall season, and so that took a lot more time than I was expecting. And then my son, who's going into his freshman year of high school, is trying out for the golf team, and I was trying to prepare him. So yes, I was playing a lot of golf, jacked up my shoulders, so playing golf very well based on that, but he's at least doing well, so we'll see how that goes. Tryouts started today, so we'll see. In other golf news, Happy Gilmore 2 came out, and look, I loved it. Like, I think if you go into it with the right expectations, I think you're going to love it, right? Like, Happy Gilmore, the original, I think some people look at it as, like, this timeless classic, right? But I think some people remember it as being like this phenomenal movie, when in reality it wasn't. It was just stupid fun. It was Happy Gilmore, or Adam Sandler doing exactly what he does, just being stupid, making dumb jokes. But that's what we loved about him. And I think season 2, we're not calling it season 2, number 2, whatever the heck this is. Really, man, taking a week off, struggling. Anyways, I thought it was great. And so it was a great tribute to golf. It was a great tribute to the movie. A lot of great cameos in there, and I thought it was a lot of fun. So haters gonna hate, but I loved it. So that's all you're gonna get from me. But that was on my mind because of golf. So no more excuses. We're in football season. We're ready to go. We're rolling. It's time to be back in this podcast. So a little recruiting update. I feel like we've been having this recruiting update continuously for the last little bit, but Celeste Moa, the number one recruit in the state of Utah, has a new date where he is announcing, and that is on July 31st. So right before the fall season starts, right before the high school season starts. And so we'll get to know where Moa decides to commit. By all accounts, it sounds like things are still good with Moa committing to Utah, but until it actually happens, it's hard to know. And so there's always something. It appears, and things can always change, but it appears that it's down to Utah and Tennessee. There's other teams in the mix, but at the same time, these have been the two that have been kind of the preeminent teams that he's been focused on. Last week, he actually got bumped up to a composite 5-star. So if Utah gets that, they, no matter what, get a 5-star recruit. They got that with Kelvin Obot, the offensive tackle. He got a 5-star from Rivals and On3, so it's one service that's giving him a 5-star. But this would put Moa at a composite, meaning the consensus among all these recruiting services. So obviously a great opportunity for him, and a great opportunity for Utah should he commit to Utah. So, well, like I said, we'll find out in a couple days now what happens there. Like I said, everything has been trending toward Utah getting him, but last minute things happen all the time. Recruiting is an interesting beast, and you never really know until it actually happens. And even then, you still have a whole season. So it's a challenge, but I think this would do really well to help Utah's class. Right now, they're at 17 commits. If he signs, that puts him at 18. A solid class for kind of the new era of of recruiting for Utah, going into the high school ranks. They're always going to have portal options available to them. And so I think that's kind of the number. I would assume anywhere between 15 and 20 is kind of where Kyle is going to look at moving forward. I'm curious to see what Morgan Scally would do. I have to assume that would be similar in terms of how they attack high school and that. But right now, if you're looking at the 247 Sports ratings, Utah's ranked 50th in the country based on their class. Some of those kids are going to get bumped up. That's just what happens as these guys go through their senior season of football. But that also happens for other schools, right? So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But if MOA does commit to Utah, that bumps them all the way up to 32nd. Pretty competitive compared to kind of what you were expecting based on how the season went for Utah. So not a bad spot, especially since you can get 2 5-star talents out of that. One being an athlete that can play both sides of the ball, obviously tremendous talent, and the other as a replacement for Spencer Fano, Caleb Lomu, assuming that they move on. So good position for Utah to be in right there. We're also in watch list season. So from now for the next 2-ish weeks, you're going to get, various Utah players being added to various watch lists. These preseason watch lists, they're good, right? It's good publicity to say, hey, these players are being looked at as kind of potential players that could be an impact in all of college football. Obviously for Utah, but in all of college football, they're getting some publicity. Not all of these turn out to be anywhere near, getting to be the semifinals or a finalist or anything like that. But, it's good to be recognized. It's good to be able to have that honor. And so today it kicks off with Devin Dampier being named to the Maxwell Award, which is given to the most outstanding college football player, basically, the top college football player. So Devin, obviously he's going to get a ton of accolades. This is not going to be the first watch list that he's put on this preseason, but good for Utah to be able to have that. It's been that way for a while. Most top Power 4 teams are going to have their quarterback in there, so I don't know that this is like earth-shattering, but at the same time, it is a good sign that there's some optimism around who he can be. There's been quarterbacks in the past that haven't been included in these preseason ranking or watch lists, so it's a sign of respect. But that's as far as it goes, right? You've got to be able to perform on the field and live up to that. And we've seen what Dampier can do in terms of what he did at New Mexico and a little bit in the spring game in a very vanilla, offense and defense. But I think you've got a guy that if he lives up to his potential and exceeds what he even did last year, and I say exceed in terms of like having a better completion percentage, bringing down the turnovers, that kind of stuff. I think there's a real chance that he's being talked about as one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12 and in college football in general. So there's a lot of great quarterbacks out there, right? Like, he's going to be among many others. And if he has a special season and is able to kind of take that elite step, sure, maybe there's an opportunity where he's a finalist for this award type thing. But, anything from him that is better than what they had last year is honestly gravy at this point. So I think he'll be better than last year, assuming that everything goes well. So like I said, watch list season, we'll update these from time to time. I don't think these are the biggest of deals. And so, we'll mention it. Touching on the AP Top 25 ballot. So I have to submit mine before August 1st. I have submitted mine already, so it's already submitted to the Associated Press. They've got it. They'll tabulate it. They'll put out their consensus ballot here in a couple weeks when we get the full preseason rankings for college football. And it's always interesting, these preseason rankings. Ranking teams in general is always kind of an interesting exercise, I should say. It's not always that easy, and it's really kind of just a snapshot in time. I've varied on how I've wanted to do my AP Top 25 from time to time. Sometimes I look at potential and kind of who they could be, how are they trending. I've looked at it as who they are at that time. There's no real clear consensus on how it's done. and every AP pollster is going to do it differently. I know there's some people that will start from scratch every single week and rank every single team based on that week, and that's quite a bit of work. And I don't, it's not always that consistent, but I think, I applaud the effort for the people that do that. I generally try to keep that within the same vein, right? Like I look at my preseason ballot, and for me, it's teams that are getting a lot of buzz, but also have some level of backing it up, right? That's not always the case, but I would say these are teams that are generally being talked about. They're they're trending, right? They're trending in an upward direction, or at least that's the hope. And so, that's kind of my approach for the preseason ballot. Look, they're meaningless. Like, I get it, right? Like, everybody complains that, why do we have preseason ballots? Like, why do we have ballots at all, right? Like, I get it. Like, it's just a way for content to be able to put out there. It's ways for teams to be able to be viewed in concepts of the rest of the teams. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Doing these, I've learned 100% they're not perfect, but I think you're also getting AP top 25 voters who are pretty close to what the committee's getting, right? It's not always perfect, and there's arguments about what the selection committee does, and does the AP votes and all these coaches poll votes, do they influence the voters that way? I would hope that my vote and all the other people that are doing this don't influence the selection committee, because I would hope that they have better research and analytics and everything to be able to evaluate these teams. But I think there's a general consensus around these teams, right? Like, I think these preseason ones, and even up into week 4, 5, 6, they're going to change a lot. And you're going to start seeing the cream rise to the top, so to speak. If a team is ranked 20th in the preseason poll, or not even ranked, and they finish 5th, that wasn't an indictment on the ballots. It was just more of how the teams moved forward, right? Arizona State obviously wasn't even ranked if I remember right, they weren't even ranked in the initial college football playoff ballot. They started getting ranked in the AP poll pretty late as well, and then ended up being, pretty high and getting a playoff bid. Like, these aren't an exact science, but it's more just a snapshot in time. And so there's that. That was a very long story for basically me teasing that I'm just not going to put Utah in my top 25. And, there's some people out there that are going to be frustrated by that, Utah fans specifically. But my reasoning is I think Utah needs to prove it, right? I do believe that Utah has the potential to be a very solid team this year. I think they can absolutely be in contention for the Big 12. I think they absolutely could be in a contention for a playoff spot, that they could be one of the better teams in college football, but I don't think they're there yet, right? And I say that because they haven't shown it on the field. Devin Dampier shows every sign that he's going to be this phenomenal quarterback for Utah, and they've made all these great strides to be able to be great on the offensive side of the ball. The defense is returning a lot, and they're always consistent. Those types of things I think are valuable, but I think they need to show it on the field before I can put them in my top 25. So that disappoints some Utah fans. I get that. But in the same vein, I think they're not that far off. Like, I would have them pretty close to that ballot, that if, they show up against UCLA and they do well, there's a real possibility that they could jump in after that first week. I don't want to be too reactionary to one week, and I think sometimes that takes place. But, a good showing from Utah at the Rose Bowl absolutely could put them in. So I could see Utah getting some votes this year. Phil Still and Brett Ciencia of Pick Six Previews have Utah in their preseason top 25 magazines. And so, like, there's a real shot you're going to see Utah ranked there. And maybe I'll be an outlier and Utah actually gets put in there. But I think for me, I want to see a little bit more from them, right? And like I said, I think there's enough there to be able to indicate that they 100% could be a top 25 team. But I want to see a little bit more on the field before that takes place. So don't hate if my preseason ballot comes out and you don't see Utah. But I think any real fan that's been watching understands why that would be the case. Especially given last year where you're coming off a 5-7 season. There's still stuff that Utah has to prove before you can consider them as one of the top 25 teams in the country. Do I think they could be there? Yes. But I think, it's still a wait and see. So we're on it, right? This week is fall camp, Camp Kyle, however some people decide to call it. This is the week where fall football essentially begins. It's the end of summer. We haven't even hit close to the end of summer, but we call it fall football, which has always been a fun semantic type debate. But fall camp is upon us. Players report technically tomorrow, Tuesday. So if you're listening to this, it's Tuesday. You're listening to this, obviously. I meant to say finishing that sentence. If you're listening to this on Monday, it's happening tomorrow, which is Tuesday. I got to stop taking time off from this podcast. I gotta stay fresh and crisp. Not that I was like phenomenal, and the fact that you're even listening to this is pretty impressive. So kudos to you because you're the real MVP. Anyways, they report on Tuesday, and then they start their practices on Wednesday. We will get an opportunity to hear from them this week, get to talk to the players. Look, there's not going to be a ton of action this week just simply because they're not in full pads. You're just getting your first look at them after they've had their summer conditioning and stuff like that. These coaches and players have been in constant communication. There's rules around kind of the communications that are there, but you've got, a good understanding of what's going on in summer camps. Devin Dampier talked about at Big 12 Media Days that he's brought in a bunch of people for off-season workouts, player run practices, that kind of stuff. And so it's really more of just kind of saying, okay, did you take that next step, right? And you're not going to see that until a few days in. We really won't get a lot of the meat, I would say, of kind of fall camp until next week. You're going to get some of the surface level stuff, kind of the stuff that Kyle Whittingham's focused on, some of the players are focused on, other coaches, that kind of stuff. But that's not the point. The point is fall camp starts this week. This is where everything kind of shifts, right? You're already seeing a lot of these coaches who are active on social media. They're already ready and saying, okay, we're off. It's season time. There's this true demarcation now of it's business mode, right? And I think all the fun that was had and all the conversations that were had, this is now the time where everything kind of takes effect, right? You've got to be able to move forward and make that progress, because at the end of the day, you only have a few weeks of practice before you hit your games. And so there's not going to be a lot of wasted time. I'm really curious to see kind of the energy vibe and how it carries over from spring. As I reported on here and on social media and in my stories, there was a drastic shift in energy and kind of the positive attitude in spring compared to the year before. And that was easy, right? That 2024 season was rough on the team, and you got to the end of the season where nobody really wanted to talk about anything. It was just a trying season. They really just wanted to kind of see the thing through, get it over with, and move on with their life. But this new crop of the roster, there's a different vibe and energy. At least there was in spring. So, and look, spring is always kind of a lighthearted moment. It's an opportunity for a lot of these guys to kind of just have, I wouldn't call it easy, but I think it's easier to kind of be a little lackadaisical and kind of maybe sometimes go through the motions, especially for veterans. But in spring, as I said earlier, like this was not the case. This was a team that felt like they were already in fall camp, that they were hitting the ground running. They were working very hard. There was a lot of high energy. Coaches were getting after these players as if they had a game in 2 weeks. This was 100% a very serious spring, which is, in contrast to other springs that haven't been that way, even after winning seasons or seasons when Utah's, on the cusp of winning, that kind of stuff. This has been different just from that vantage point. Like I said, I'm curious to see if that carries over for the fall. I have my suspicions that it will, just simply based on the way that these players talked at Big 12 Media Days, that the way that they've carried themselves, the energy that's been coming from the coaching staff and everybody. Like, I feel like there's just this general vibe that's up. Now, just because you have a positive vibe doesn't mean that you're going to win on the field, right? Like, we get that. But I think I'm really curious to see how that translates to the next level now that things are going to be much more difficult. Now it's where Kyle Whittingham and the coaching staff are going to look at these positions and say, okay, here's really where it goes. And that's where that adversity comes, right? It's easy to sit here and say, oh, X, Y, Z, these players are going to start, that kind of stuff. these are going to be your depth players. And then you start seeing the guys that maybe aren't happy with their roles, or maybe they're, not in a position where they feel like they need to be. How does that change the dynamic of the team? And I would say the teams that generally have this positive momentum, positive vibe, that kind of stuff, those are the teams that generally they see something, right? Like they understand that they're part of something and it can work. Don't get me wrong. There was a lot of positive vibes last year, but there was a different kind of vibe last year. I think there was a lot of excitement for Cam Rising because everybody knew he was back. But I think there was very much so this, all of our eggs are in this Cam Rising basket. And I don't know that anybody really realized that at the time. It was, we're going to be dominant because we've got Cam Rising. We're going to the Big 12, that kind of stuff. And then when it went away, you kind of started to see the cracks that were already there. I'm not saying that there couldn't be cracks right now in this team. I just feel like this team is much more cohesive. They're connected better. It's a team that right now, 2 days before fall camp starts, appears to be on an upward trajectory. So we'll see. Let's go through some storylines of what this is. We're going to have a few things that are going to be talked about. Some, like I said, are going to be addressed here sooner rather than later. But at the same time, there's going to be a few storylines that come into it. And look, they're not anything earth-shattering. Like I feel like they're pretty basic this year because of just kind of the turnover, especially on the offensive side of the ball. There's not, the storyline of is Cam Rising going to play, that kind of stuff, right? Like those storylines are different. I feel like this year's storylines are pretty basic in terms of just kind of their application to regular football. But in that same vein, they're very important to how this team goes. And as we saw last year, if things aren't going well and we don't have answers to some of these questions early, it could pose some problems for the end of the year. So I don't even know if I'd call this the biggest storyline, but one of the top storylines is obviously going to be about Kyle Whittingham. Is this his last season? I think he got much more candid at Big 12 Media Days about kind of his reason for coming back. I think in spring he kind of towed the line. It was just like, yeah, why wouldn't I come back, right? But I think in summer he decided to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and just say like he was not satisfied with the way that the season went, and obviously didn't want to end his career on that kind of a season. So not really earth-shattering by any means, but I think it kind of shows that he did take that into consideration. And so I honestly went into that last game of the season thinking that Kyle was done. Everything was trending that way. The post-game press conferences and how everybody carried themselves, everything was trending towards Kyle walking away. And then he decided a couple weeks later to say no, he was coming back. So I really think that if Utah has a solid season this year, what that means, I don't know. Is it 8 wins? Is it 9 wins? Is it 10? Do you have to get to a Big 12 championship? Do you have to get to the playoff? I don't know what that success looks like. But I have to imagine that a successful season sends Kyle Whittingham out. This is not based on full, verified information. It's just kind of my gut instinct. I've had conversations that kind of say that, but I think ultimately Kyle's the only one that knows. I know people that are very close to him that have had many long conversations with him, and it honestly is a toss-up. So this isn't one of those things where I think somebody knows and they're just holding it out. I think Kyle lives kind of in that day-to-day realm, right? Like right now, he knows that it wasn't good enough last year, and so he's going to continue. And so saying right now on July 28th, does he know that this is his last season? I don't think he does. I think there's expectations that if the season is good, yes, this is his last season. And I think that's kind of the expectation. But I don't think that he honestly knows right now either. So it's still a wait and see. You're not going to get a Kyle Whittingham, farewell tour. That's just not his style. Kyle would duck out, and do whatever he needs to kind of avoid the public attention if he could. Even though he's one of the most recognizable people in the state. It's not going to be an easy way to just kind of duck out of it, but that's kind of his personality. He's not going to hype it up. He's not going to try to have a win-win for the Gipper kind of mentality. Maybe there's conversations like that inside of the locker room. I would be very surprised. If anything, it would come from the players who kind of have that same feeling. So I don't think any conversation will be had about Kyle Whittingham's last year. If it does, I'm wrong, and kudos to them for being able to do that. But I think that's kind of the direction this is going to go. So I would assume that this is his last year. We move on to the Morgan Scally era after that. I think the contracts have been written this way. It feels like everything is kind of lending itself to this, but anything is possible. Beyond that, the next biggest storyline is pretty basic as well, and that's Devin Dampier, right? Like everything else that I'm going to talk about here in a second, really, I don't want to say it's nothing, but I think based on how everything went last year with poor QB play, Devin is going to be the big focus. And quarterback always is, right? Like every team, the focus is always on the quarterback. You get all the praise when things are going well, and you get all the heat when things are going bad, right? Like that's just the nature of it. These guys are hyped up a ton. They crash hard if they don't live up to that hype, and then they've got to kind of rewrite their story. You could have it be Bo Nix. You could have it Michael Penix Jr. You could have it, there's a number of guys that haven't lived up to the hype. Even Utah's first opponent this year, Nico Iamaleava, hasn't lived up to the hype that was expected. And so it's a tough position to play, but I think there's so much riding on this for Utah. And I don't think this is the same as the Cam Rising situation where everything is in the Devin Dampier basket. Don't get me wrong. They need Devin Dampier all season, and they need him to live up to the expectations that they have for him, right? Like, we all get that. But I don't think that Utah's built in the same way as they were last year, where if Devin goes down for any number of time, I feel like Utah's much more positioned to absorb kind of his loss, if that makes sense. Like, they've got different talent around him that works. They also have a play caller that is going to have it's not a simple offense, but it's a much easier offense to be able to digest and understand than what you had with Andy Ludwig. So, yes, Devin Dampier is the storyline. He's the major storyline. He's the biggest storyline, whatever you want to call this. And everybody wants to see if he can live up to that Power 4 potential, being able to go from a team in New Mexico where you took him to the number 4 team in the country in terms of total offense, not in rankings or anything, but being able to get a high-powered offense and then translating that to the Power 4 schedule, right? That's going to be the biggest question. And it's a great opportunity to showcase that at Game 1 against UCLA on the road in the Rose Bowl, where there's going to be a lot of attention on that team, in arguably it's not arguably, it's the last broadcast TV slot or network TV, I should say, for people on opening weekend. So you're going to get a big fix of games throughout the day. People are going to kind of digest all that and then still have Utah UCLA at the end of the day to really kind of settle in on. So really good opportunity. We're going to know a lot in fall camp about who he is, but at the end of the day, you're not going to know, his true ability until he actually goes up against a defense that can actually tackle him, right? He's obviously shifty. He's a true dual threat quarterback. We've had many conversations about this. But can he live up to that hype? So really fascinated to kind of see how that goes. And then, next to him is obviously the Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu mixing in all with that offensive line. This tandem, right, the offensive line and Devin Dampier, if they can be what has been talked about, Utah has everything available to them. There's true belief that this offensive line can give them the protection that they need to do exactly what they need to do, right? And so if you can get that, there's a real possibility that Devin has all of the ability available to him to be, or all of the playbook essentially available to him to do that. You do have other players that are going to factor into that. But I think if these two specifically, then we can even combine them into one big storyline. If those two can kind of hit, Utah is going to be in a much different place, and I think they're going to live up to that top 25 billing that I think they could be, right? I think that's where it comes from. So those are the general ones. Those are the real general ones, ones that aren't really a surprise. You kind of have to talk about them just because they are. We're going to hear a lot about Devin Dampier in the next month. and kind of what his leadership style is and kind of who he is and the expectations there. But we won't really know any more than what we've had for the last year until, Utah kicks off at the Rose Bowl. So now beyond Devin, you've got, I would say one of the bigger storylines is going to be your backup QB position, right? Isaac Wilson versus Bird Ficklin. Those are the two that are vying for that number 2 spot, number 3 spot. Isaac obviously got a lot of playing time last year after he was thrust into it as a true freshman, was put in a tough spot, right? Like, there's going to be a lot of haters of Isaac Wilson, and I understand it, right? Like he did not process the information the way that he needed to. And so it was a difficult situation that only got made worse because there was so much more pressure on him, especially in an offense that just doesn't, it just didn't work, right? And so he's going to take a lot of flack for that and has continued to do that, but he's going to have to face that adversity and move on, right? In spring, he talked about how he just wasn't simply good enough. And I think you saw in his game last year where, you saw the confident guy. You saw the guy that came in there and said, look, I can be the star. And then midway through, he kind of got banged up as well. Things started to happen where there you could see the pressure and the frustrations put on him, and the team was frustrated. Everything was weighing on his shoulder, and so as he tried to do more for the team, the worse things got, right? And so I think it's a tough situation for him. Really curious to see how he's able to fight through that. If he's able to fight through that, right? This is the true definition of character, is how he's able to fight through that and see. I think he still has potential to be a great quarterback, but he's going to have to fight off Bird Ficklin, who has made some great strides already in his time at Utah. He's put on a lot of weight in his short time with Utah, but this is a guy. Bird Ficklin fits the mold of what Utah is now doing in their offense more than Isaac does, and so you've got a guy that is much more similar to Devin Dampier in Bird Ficklin than you do with Isaac, but Isaac can be somewhat similar. He's not the true dual threat quarterback the same as Devin is, but he has that capability. And so really curious to see kind of that battle. Bird has probably one of the best passing arms that I've seen of this group. And so there's potential there. But do you put all the eggs in the basket of a true freshman again should Devin Dampier miss time, right? Like Kyle's ultimately going to go with the guy that gives them the best chance. That's what he says. I think there's some scar tissue there of doing that last year with Isaac and turning the keys over that quickly. But at the same time, where were they going to go? I know, the Brandon Rose conversation, we don't need to rehash that. But I think, they're going to go with whoever they feel is the best fit for the team. And that could be Isaac Wilson. It could be Bird Ficklin. I'll tell you this much, though. Bird is not going to be an easy person to sit down, right? Like, I think he's a guy that brings a lot of dynamic ability. And so Isaac really has to step up his game this fall to be able to make that clear. If Bird goes into the UCLA game as the number 2 guy, I have to imagine that he absolutely beat out Isaac Wilson. I don't think this is Kyle trying to do anything to mess that up. I think they truly believe that he would be the better fit at the time, but I wouldn't rule Isaac out as being QB2, right? And I know that frustrates some segment of the fan base where they don't want to see Isaac ever out on the field again, and I get that. But at the same time, I think if he's made the strides to be able to beat out Bird Ficklin, I think he's earned it, right? Whatever that means, Bird could have a bad fall as well. I mean, that it is what it is. So I'm curious to see that battle. That's going to be the one that I think has the most attention, just simply because, you've got to be able to have that depth. Kyle Whittingham joked that they should have had 7 quarterbacks last year or the last 2 years because they've kept going down to their 5th string quarterback. So, whether you're 2 or 3, there is potential you can play. So this is going to be a big battle. It's going to be a fascinating battle to see kind of who steps up. I think Bird really took some he advanced more in spring than Isaac did, but I think Isaac was slowly building up his confidence, and when he got there, you were starting to see things happen a little bit more. But I think based on spring, I would give the nod to Bird at this point, but we'll see. Outside of that is running back depth, right? So on the offensive side of the ball, there was a lot of turnover, but no position was hit more than the running back room. Yeah, quarterback, Isaac stayed, so you've got that, but I think no position was hit harder than running back. And for good reason, it needed to be there, right? Like, they needed to change over. They needed to do everything they could to retool that room because Utah just quite honestly hasn't lived up to their expectations that they've had for themselves in the run game. You had Mekhi Bernard who did everything for the team and put it all on his shoulders to be able to get 1,000 yards and to be able to be that guy, but it was never really the position that was fit for him, right? Like, he was never expected to be the guy that was going to be your leading guy. And that's not to say he couldn't be, but I think based on how that offense was developed, that was never kind of the system that he was supposed to be. And yet he was still able to do it, which shows, the talent that he had, the workhorse ability that he was able to bring despite all the frustrations, despite the injuries, despite everything. He worked hard to get there. So with that, you've got a whole new running back room. Wayshawn Parker, he comes in as RB1, or at least the expected one. He's the number 4 overall running back recruit in the portal. Utah won with that, and so it was a great opportunity to get somebody with a ton of potential that from Washington State. There's a real optimism that he can be even better. He's gone on social media as well and talked about how he can be even better than last year, and he obviously has to prove it at this level. But I think he, at least right now, is the favorite. And I know some people got a little frustrated when Kyle said it's, he has the inside job in spring, but there's other guys behind him that are going to push him, right? I do think Wayshawn is the guy, but there are some talented players behind him that I think can at least show themselves as being viable options in the system. So just as a simple reminder, Wayshawn was hurt in spring. He had to get, if I remember right, I could be misremembering, but he had to have like a minor surgery at the beginning of spring and, really wasn't able to be with the team fully the way that they wanted him to until later. But they feel confident in who they've got with him. And, I think based on the offseason, there's a real possibility that he can be a solid back for Utah. And in this offense where they want to establish the run, Parker is going to be paramount to that, right? Dampier is going to be a part of that as well. And there's going to be some other factors in there as well to kind of help set up the run game. But I think Parker, if he can be effective and the offensive line can do its job to help him get those yards, this could be a great 1-2 punch with just Dampier and Parker. So really curious with that one. The other contenders for that position, I'm curious to see how this all shakes out. And you're going to have some guys that are third down backs, or you're going to have guys that are specifically there for, short yardage situations or off speed backs or whatever it may be. There's going to be, a bunch of these guys mixed in, but curious to see kind of the pecking order here. One of those guys, though, that I think is going to get a lot of playing time and also benefited a ton in spring was Nakari Rogers, the New Mexico running back transfer. Obviously knows the system really well that they're going to utilize. Really hits, the hole hard and is able to do well. Made up some great plays in spring. Really fascinated to kind of see his development. And I think he can be a guy that you can rely on to be that third down back. I don't think he's just that, right? I don't think he's just the short yardage, third down guy. I think he has potential to do more, but I think he's kind of the leading candidate in my mind to push Wayshawn Parker. I don't think he's to the level, the top end level that Parker has, but I think he's got that talent to push him and really kind of make his impact known on the field. Beyond that, you've got UNLV transfer Devin Green, who showed off some good stuff in spring, a little bit more of an off-speed back. That's not to say that he can't, hit the gap hard and do things well, but I think he's a little bit more of the off-pace type situation. Was a high school teammate with Wayshawn Parker. They were a 1-2 punch together, so they have some familiarity with each other and understanding. So I think there's some good opportunities there. And then they brought in Bryce Duke in the spring portal from Old Dominion. Really curious to see how he factors into this. I've heard good things about him, but, we'll see what that looks like in fall. Does he make a push for this? Does he, overtake any one of these guys? Or is this one of those players that's just going to be a depth piece this year, and they kind of utilize him more? We'll see. Beyond that, you have Daniel Bray, freshman who came in during spring, got a lot of playing time, and Kyle Whittingham, at least in spring, said the expectation is that he's going to factor in on the field somewhere, right? I don't think you're going to have him as that every down type back, or the guy that's going to come in and be this consistent playmaker for Utah in terms of the run game. But I think he's got enough of a skill set where he can run the ball, but he can also kind of be that gadgetry type player that can help this team. So I don't know if they'll line him up in the slot or, line him up in the backfield and utilize his pass catching abilities that way, or his speed. I just think he's going to be one of those weapons that you put on the field and you find a way to get him the ball regardless of what position he is or what he does. Outside of that, you have Racine Gilroy. This is also a freshman. He's coming in the fall, but Gilroy is young. He reclassified for this 25 class, and so he's actually really, really young, right? So I wouldn't expect to see a ton of action from him early. That's not to say that he couldn't factor in and make his presence known, but I think he's one of those guys that it's going to take a bit. And if you give him a year and he can get into the system, I think based on kind of the measurables and what is expected of him as a high school player, there's real potential here for him to be kind of that next guy that could be a great asset for Utah in the run game. So that's kind of your look at the running back depth. The storyline there obviously is, what that depth is going to look like and what's going to go on. Moving on, wide receivers. Look, like I said, these are basic storylines, nothing earth-shattering. But I think this one in particular is going to be the most interesting to me, simply because there's so many new names there, and we don't know what it's going to look like. In spring, there was a lot of positivity around a lot of these players and kind of the impact that they made with Devin Dampier and the connections. You had Dadrian Zipperer, who did really well. You had Creed Whitmore, who caught a lot of passes and was kind of a gadgetry player, but could still get downfield. Ryan Davis really kind of stepped up and pushed and made a name for himself. Obviously, he's from New Mexico as well, so he understands the offense and may have a leg up, so to speak, in kind of what they're doing. But then Utah has some transfer portal players, in Tobias Merriweather, who could potentially be wide receiver one, has had some injury history. Can he take that step and be the guy that they need him to be that deep threat guy? If they can get him to be, that true wide receiver one, that really opens up this game for Utah, where they've got a lot of plays that they can utilize in the short to intermediate routes. They're going to use a lot more screen passes this year, whether it be bubble screens or tunnel screens or any type of situation that way to get the pass out quickly. They're going to utilize that, but they have to go deep, right? Like, you've got to be able to spread the ball around. You've got to be able to get vertical. You can't just go bubble screen and hope that everything's going to change. That still keeps those linemen, those corners, the safeties closer to the line, and it makes it much harder for the quarterback. And so you've got to have that vertical threat. Tobias Merriweather absolutely can be there. Larry Simmons, another transfer guy from Southern Miss, who can be there. Heard a lot of good things about him in the offseason. Curious to see how he factors in. Justin Stevenson from Wyoming. He didn't have as much. What should I say? He wasn't as much of an impact in spring, but I think this offseason where he's able to develop more chemistry with Dampier, kind of get the timing down, get the playbook down better. I think there's true potential for him to be an asset on this team and be able to be utilized in a way that is going to be beneficial for Utah. And then you also have true freshman J.J. Buchanan, who's come in, and he's coming in the fall, so he hasn't had as much time with them, but Buchanan is expected to be a phenomenal athlete. And so we'll see if he can make an impact this early on. But I think Utah has some pieces that can do well, right? Like, I don't know that you need a ton. Like, I think with what Utah's trying to do on the offense with their run game and kind of mixing things up, And you'll get to my next storyline here shortly that's going to factor into this. But I think what they're trying to do there is going to be very beneficial, that if you at least have a moderate receiving core, I think you're going to be okay, right? Like you still have to get vertical. Like I said, you can't just live off of bubble screens. We've seen the years where Utah lived off of bubble screens, and teams knew it so well. It was broadcast so much that that teams were already in the backfield before the player caught the pass. So I mean, you've got to be able to be creative. You've got to be able to utilize it in a way that is not going to be keyed off very well. But I think if Utah can get, a decent amount in the intermediate game to, the deeper range with some of these guys, I think that gives them a lot of potential, because now you have to respect that run far more than you would have if you're just getting those short to intermediate routes. So big storyline there. See who steps up. Unless somebody has just a standout fall, I don't know that we're going to still have a good understanding of that until we get into the season, right? I don't know that we're going to have a full understanding of that even after the UCLA game. I think it's going to take a bit. It's going to take till almost that Texas Tech game to really understand what Utah has at wide receiver and what Devin Dampier can do to kind of help this group. So I think they have the talent, right? Like on paper, I think they're better collectively than what they had last year, but there's still so many questions there. And if there's one big question, it's going to be this area. And like I said, I don't think it has to be this huge asset to the team, but it has to be there, right? Like you have to factor in, you've got to be able to be there, or else this team that you feel like can be really dynamic is going to struggle, and you're going to get teams loading up the box. And we've seen that time and time again, where when Utah gets the box loaded up against them and you have a quarterback that's running for his life, it just doesn't work, right? So you've got to be able to have a factor, or you've got to have that wide receivers factor into the game. Enough said. As that goes, my X factors for this, and I'm counting this as a storyline as well, is I want to see what Nate Johnson and Hunter Andrews can do. These are two players, and you can even throw J.G. Buchanan in here. I think he's going to kind of be this type of player as well, where they're the kind of the Swiss Army knife players, right? These are the guys where they can do their position that they've been set up to do, but I think they're going to be so much more. And Nate Johnson has teased it. The coaches have teased it. I think the way that we saw in spring, which I can't really talk about a lot of all that I saw, Nate is going to be used in a various, there's going to be so many things that they want to try to use him with. Whether it actually sees itself on the field remains to be seen. But I think they expect him to just be everywhere. I wouldn't be shocked to see him under center at times. I wouldn't be shocked to see him lining up as wide receiver, which is now his position. I wouldn't be what am I trying to say? I wouldn't be surprised. There we go. If he's, lined up in the backfield, I think there's just a lot of opportunities for him. To me, he's going to be the guy more than even any of those receivers. I know he's lumped in as a receiver, but more than any of those other receivers that I mentioned, that if he can be kind of like the Britton Covey type, and I hate putting those labels on people because Britton Covey was such a unique player, but if you can have an impact like that, I think that absolutely changes the game for Utah, because now you have to absolutely respect the run with what Dampier and Parker and all these other guys are doing. And now you have to figure out, okay, is Nate actually going to throw it here? Is he going to catch? Is he going to, what is he going to be? And I think that can keep a defense guessing. That's going to be my expectation for what Jason Beck calls, is trying to use somebody like a Nate Johnson just to get the defense second guessing. And if you can get them second guessing, you've already won, right? They can't play instinctual. They have to kind of think too much and say, okay, I have to respect this guy, but what's he going to do? And then by that point, maybe, somebody slips behind them and you've got a nice pass or whatever it may be. So really curious to see there. Hunter Andrews, similarly, he's a tight end. Kyle says he's kind of more of an H-back tight end. You're going to see him in a lot of other similar ways to Nate Johnson. He's got speed. He's great ball handler where he can catch the ball, got great hands that way. I think you're going to find those two being very much in the same vein in different ways. But if you can get Hunter Andrews open, he's going to be a problem. At least that's what it was early on in spring. But I think 100% these two players are a big storyline to how this Utah offense is going to go. So, as I said, generic for the most part, but I think those are the biggest storylines on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, I might put this as the year of John O'Hall. I think he's going to have a big impact on the team. And that's saying something considering you have Levani Damuni and Lander Barton in as veteran guys who are proven guys at linebacker who are going to be great. But I think Jonathan Hall has made that transition from safety last year to linebacker. Didn't really love the idea of changing until he did, and then really kind of honed in on it, and you started to see some great potential from him. Now that he has a full year under his belt of the same position, I really think there's true potential where he could be a huge star on that defense. So, I mean, there's a lot of stars on that defense, a lot of guys that can make some plays, but I think Jonathan Hall is going to be one of those guys that is going to have his name remembered for sure. So, storyline being more just like, what does this year look for him? You've got a veteran leadership in that linebacker room, which is going to be absolutely beneficial for this team, especially with Damuni and Barton, who've seen pretty much everything you can see. As long as they can play instinctual and stay healthy, those two alone can be great, but you add Hall in there, and this is a trio that is going to make some problems. Beyond that, cornerback depth, this is the position that Kyle talks about the most on the defensive side when what keeps him up at night type questions. So Scooby Davis has essentially earned himself the starting role. I'm sure if you were to ask Sharif Shah, he'd say that he's not there yet just because he expects a ton. But there's been a lot of consensus that Scooby Davis is kind of one of your guys on one side. And then it's a toss-up for some of these other guys. Don Saunders, Blake Cotton, those two got a ton of play in spring, and we're kind of fighting it out for it. But you've got some other contenders in Tristan Thompson, J.C. Hart, Rock Caldwell. Caldwell probably will take a little bit more time to get there. Jalen Mosen, maybe kind of a similar spot, maybe take some time. You also have Jason Stokes Jr., who's a freshman who, he can come in and have some impact as well. I'm really fascinated to kind of see how this develops, because I think Utah has the talent there. They've got some size. It's just a matter of, can they live up to the expectations that Utah has for this position? People keep doubting cornerback depth every single year. And, I think deep down it bugs the defensive staff that they feel like, why are you doubting us since we've proved it every year? But it's true. They do. They continue to prove it every year. That's not to say things couldn't go crazy, but I think they have the talent. They've got the size to be able to be a real difference maker. I think Saunders and Cotton probably have the inside track, but there's other players there that have done well in the offseason and in spring that could make some noise. So really curious to see there. It's not just going to be a 1-2 guy, right? Like there's going to be some rotation. So you're going to probably see 3, 4, 5 of those guys in there and kind of how they factor in. There's always potential where Smith Snowden falls in there as well. In spring, they talked a lot about moving him to the outside and making his impact known. They want him on the field. It's not one of those things where they want to take him off the field. And so I think regardless of what it is, maybe he's one of those outside corners. He's still going to play nickel, but Utah doesn't play that position every single down. And they want Smith Snowden out there every single down. So really curious to see how that goes. There's been some good depth there at the nickel position, and so maybe they can have a little bit more freedom. But I think with what he's able to do there, they want to be able to find other corners, right? They want to be able to have guys that can specialize there and let Smith kind of be the X factor on the defense, because he absolutely is, and he's going to make a lot of great plays for Utah and have a lot of potential there. So that's going to be the biggest storyline on defense. Outside of that, defensive line, the questions there are more just kind of who's going to step up. Dallas Vakalahi is going to get a lot of play as the starter there. Really came on strong at the end of the last season. I think you're going to see an uptick in kind of even his potential and what he could be coming off of a mission. I think there's true potential there to be a disruptor. Outside of that, the guys that are probably going to factor in there as well is Aliki Vamahi, obviously a veteran player who, when he's healthy, is a run stopper, just phenomenal player, can do really well, so you have him. But you also have Carson Kafusi, who's young, but he's also coming in and making a name for himself already. in spring, there was already conversations about him pushing, and I wouldn't at all be surprised if it's Dallas Vakalahi and Carson Kafusi at any point in there. So those two are going to be great assets together. You also have Jonah Laea, that's another veteran player that's going to come in there. So defensive tackle positions are pretty well set. In terms of the defensive ends, the real question here, or the storyline coming into this, is kind of, can they create the havoc plays that Utah really wants, right? The last couple years, Utah's had some talented players. Injuries have derailed a lot of that, but they've had guys that have done well. They just haven't been able to create the havoc plays at a consistent rate that Utah wants. Havoc plays being getting in the backfield, pressuring the quarterback, getting sacks, that kind of stuff. They just haven't gotten to that same level that we've seen in years past for a defensive line that Utah's known for, right? Logan Fano, he did play all of last year, but he was still kind of coming back through his ACL tear. The fact that he even played the whole season is pretty remarkable. But now that you can get him fully healthy, and assuming that he stays healthy, there's true potential that he could kind of be the star there again. He was really hitting his stride before he tore his ACL in that Oregon State game, where he was living in the backfield. Like, nobody could touch him. And so really curious to see if he can kind of take that next step again and get back to that level. I think everything is kind of trending that way, but, we'll see. Opposite of him, you're going to have a two-way battle between John Henry Daly and Paul Fitzgerald. These are two guys that continue to fight and battle with each other. John Henry Daly probably has the upper hand, but Paul Fitzgerald has proven experience at Utah State, has done well. These two are going to be great assets to be able to get into the backfield. And then you have Cash Dillon, who's come on strong, another young player that is really going to find his way on the field. I wouldn't at all be surprised if he gets a lot more action this year, and really is a factor in that room. I mean, he's the guy that just is a nightmare for opposing offenses, right? Like, he can get into that backfield, he can be disruptive. Really curious to see what he can be. And then, an outsider spot is probably Lance Holtzclaw. I think he's still got some room to grow, especially with the guys ahead of him. But, there's a name that you could potentially hear this fall in kind of his progression. So, those are the big storylines. Basically went through a lot of these positions. As I said, they're pretty vanilla in how it is. But I think this team, that's kind of where they're at. Defense, look, the defensive storylines are always pretty vanilla just because Utah's been so good at getting them to be consistent and continually doing what they do. Offense obviously is going to be different. I think just the major overarching storyline is just, what is this offense going to be? So really fascinated, really excited to get up there and talk to these players and coaches and see how this goes. And next week, we'll have some audio and some other stuff to be able to talk about that is actually football-based. So with that, we'll sign off. I hope you're having a great week, and check out Twitter or Blue Sky or wherever you need to see current updates, and then go read the articles on KSL.com. We'll always keep you updated here on the podcast too. With that, signing out. Have a great one.